Good morning, folks. Happy Thursday. Welcome to Advisory. I hope you're all doing well. Today, we are going to continue our series on Black History Month by continuing to talk about systemic racism. Last time we talked about systemic racism, we watched parts of videos that showed us things about some statistics regarding systemic racism and how race plays a factor in how people grow up. We talked about how it can affect things from housing to schools to what kind of job you're able to get. And we talked about the school segregation problem and how Dallas particularly had a very big issue with school segregation. And we had ourselves a little bit of a moment with our namesake, Warren Travis White. We're going to continue our discussion over systemic racism today by talking specifically about housing and how the systems around where people live and how people are housed can also be influenced by systemic racism. When you think of things like a good neighborhood or a bad neighborhood, what are the sorts of things that come to mind? What do the houses look like in your imagination of a good neighborhood versus a bad neighborhood? What do the people look like? What do the businesses around the neighborhoods look like? This is a question that plagues anybody moving anywhere, because if you're trying to buy or rent a house in a city that you don't know well, you want it to be in a safe area, and you want it to be in a place where your kids can go to a good school, and you want it to be a good place to live. But how we define good place to live and good neighborhood all has to do with systemic racism in housing. Look at this map of Dallas neighborhoods according to bestneighborhood.org. So we're kind of up here past the northern line, but look at the main city of Dallas. You see Highland Park right here. You see University Park. You see some of East Dallas and Lower Greenville. And then in the middle of Dallas, it's pretty green. But look what happens when you go further south and further west in Dallas. Look what happens when you go towards Irving or Grand Prairie. These little areas start to become red, and people start to say, oh, don't move there because that's a bad neighborhood. And it makes me wonder, how did these neighborhoods become quote unquote bad neighborhoods? Why do people strive to buy a house in one of these nice, green, ritzier neighborhoods and don't try to get any sort of housing down in the south part of Dallas? Before understanding how these neighborhoods got to where they are, you have to have a little bit of background information over how we do housing in this country, generally speaking. And it all comes down to renting a house versus buying a house. When you rent a house, someone else owns the house and you pay them rent every month. I rent my house, I do not own my house, and I pay a monthly rent. When you rent a house, the owner is responsible for maintenance costs and property taxes. And so anything that happens to the house or anything that goes wrong with the house, usually it's up to the owner, not the renter, to fix it. And usually when you rent a house, you sign a lease that is often 12 months at a time to be in that house. It's a contract to be in that house for the full year and pay rent. When you buy a house, you own the house once you pay it off. Maintenance, property tax, everything is your responsibility. So if something goes wrong, if a pipe bursts in the house, it's on you. And instead of a lease, you have a mortgage. Unless you pay all cash, which is very rare, you sign a mortgage with the bank to pay off monthly over many years. And technically, while you own the house and live in it, the bank actually owns the house until you pay it off. So unless you have cash like this, like Scrooge McDuck, and you're just swimming through all of your money in your vault, you're probably going to have to sign a mortgage with the bank. They give you all of the money up front to pay for the full house, and then you sign a mortgage to pay them back over a certain amount of years, usually many, many years. And the decisions that banks make in terms of who they give this money to and who they let sign their mortgages, that contributes so much to this idea of good and bad neighborhoods.
The ACORN study is the largest in the nation so far. It involves data gathered from more than 70 savings and loans and banks in the Dallas area on literally thousands of loans. It indicates that the practice of redlining is widespread and significant in the Dallas area. The study shows a geographic pattern of home loan investment in Dallas, including a high investment zone, a medium investment zone, and a disinvestment zone, the so-called redlined area. The disinvestment zone is near the city's core. It includes East Dallas, parts of Oak Cliff, Little Mexico, Pleasant Grove, Fair Park, and South Dallas. The report says the differences in home loan investments between North Dallas and the disinvestment zone are tremendous. North Dallas and the Park cities have about 26% of the city's population, but have more than 75% of the city's home loans. The disinvestment area has about 43% of the city's population, but receives only 3% of the home loans made within the city limits.
So as you heard, only 3% of all bank loans for houses went to 43% of the entire population of Dallas. And you saw those areas that were restricted by these banks' policies. And while we would like to think that this is a problem of the past, a fairly recent report by WFAA showed that the problem still persists today.
Interstate 30. So many people drive east, west, north, and south of it, you might not even realize how it carves Dallas in two. I-30 is also the line that largely separates financial opportunity in the north from financial barriers in the south. Why is that? Well, we have found new evidence of practices that exclude Black and Hispanic residents from getting bank loans below I-30.
Petrie says he went to Houston to get financing for his business after 7 local banks and savings and loans turned him down. He sees his problems as typical, wanting to expand, but getting little or no support from financial institutions.
In this community, it's an economic embargo. We wouldn't have a housing problem. We wouldn't have an unemployment problem. We wouldn't have a police problem.
That was 32 years ago. And today, car wholesaler Robert Petrie is still in business at that same location in South Dallas.
The things that you talked about in '88, I mean, is anything better? It's all pretty much the same?
Yeah, I would say worse.
Today, Petrie also owns 132 acres of land, including a large event center called Skyline Ranch. He says all of that comes despite a lack of access to bank loans below I-30.
They feel that, hey, the black community, blacks don't deserve opportunities. So we're going to deny them. Now,
but they're not just sitting around like saying that, right, in their boardroom.
Well, there are ways, yeah, because they underestimate what we can do as a people.
Above I-30, there's a high concentration of white people and upper income neighborhoods. South of 30 is mostly Black and Hispanic people, with 38% of residents living below the poverty line.
This area over here is the corner of the Dallas North Tollway and Northwest Highway. And there are just banks all over the place. There's a bank over there.
There are 31 bank branches packed into this corner, while in all of southern Dallas, there are just 58 bank branches in total. Above I-30, across Dallas County, there are 474 bank branches. The city has a long history of excluding blacks from bank loans. It's called redlining. Check out this map from 1937, with red lines drawn around the south side communities that we're talking about. For decades, banks openly denied loans here, particularly to black communities, and the government said it was okay. Then in 1977, Congress attempted to remedy the practice of redlining with the Community Reinvestment Act. The CRA encouraged banks to meet the credit needs of the entire community where they operate. Under the CRA, each bank draws an assessment area map, which basically outlines where it does business. And the law says a map must contain entire counties, cities, or towns, and it cannot arbitrarily exclude low or moderate income geographies. But the CRA recognized some banks might not be able to serve an entire community, and in that case, they could use something like a highway to draw a boundary, as long as that new map does not illegally discriminate. So our team asked every bank in Dallas County, 105 of them, to provide us with their assessment area maps, the area where they do business. And what we found is that 20% of the banks in Dallas County draw maps that exclude all or parts of southern Dallas.
I mean, so the opportunity is there for any bank, if you want to make a committed effort to be part of this community, be part of the effort. I mean, I think it's here.
James McGee was a compliance manager who used to help banks follow the rules of the CRA. Now he advocates for greater reinvestment below I-30 as president of the nonprofit Southern Dallas Progress.
So when they draw those kind of maps, is that Is that discrimination?
I think it's discrimination because you look at the demographic of people and where they're located and you're excluding them. I mean, I think it is discrimination.
Here are some examples of what we found. Dallas Capital Bank has a single branch in Dallas County near the tollway and 635. From this location, Dallas Capital provides services to all of Denton County and half of Collin County, but covers virtually nothing in Dallas County below I-30. Dallas Capital Bank has declined to comment for this story. Benchmark Bank has 3 branches in Preston and Royal, Hillcrest and Lovers Lane, and McKinney Avenue, just 2 miles north of I-30. Benchmark drew a map that extends north into portions of Denton and Collin counties and picks up parts of Dallas's affluent Kessler Park and Bishop Arts neighborhoods in Oak Cliff, but little else below I-30. Benchmark says all areas conform to CRA regulatory requirements. There's also Interbank. Its 2 Dallas County branches are located at 75 and Mockingbird and the tollway at Lovers Lane. From these branches, Interbank drew a map that excludes virtually everything south of I-30. To the south of Dallas County, Interbank also has branches in Ellis County, and one of them is just 2 miles from the Dallas County line. Interbank serves all of Ellis County, Erath, Somerville, Hood, Parker, and Tarrant counties, but only half of Dallas County. Interbank declined multiple requests for a comment, but in its most recent bank examination, regulators said no evidence of discrimination was identified.
Why do you think it looks like that map?
Oh, they made a conscious effort to create it like that. And that's going to be a senior management decision that's, particularly, doing that and okaying it. And it's additionally signed off by the regulators.
Banks with maps that include all of Dallas County make 48% of their loans to whites, 22% to Hispanics, and 7% to blacks. Those numbers don't total 100% because not all borrowers report race data. But by comparison, we found banks that exclude Dallas below I-30 lend 45% to whites, 8% to Hispanics, and 2% to blacks. But what about the bank regulators, the people who grade the banks every few years on how well they serve low-income communities? Well, the regulators give passing grades to banks 98% of the time based on the exams that we reviewed. And James says that's happening because regulators don't scrutinize how the maps are drawn, they just grade the banks on what happens inside the maps.
I mean, it has to be judged harder by the regulator. I mean, if we're in school and every class passes, I think it's something wrong with the test. And I think outside of that, the banks are going to be hard inclined to possibly improve their current strategy. Because it's working and they're passing their exams.
3 different government agencies work together to evaluate banks. The Federal Reserve Bank declined to comment for this story, but it's proposing rule changes to modernize regulations because of weaknesses in the Community Reinvestment Act. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC, says if our examiners identify a pattern or practice of discrimination at an institution, the case is referred to the Department of Justice for appropriate action. And the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, regulates big national banks. The OCC has a new rule requiring that assessment areas be no smaller than a whole county.
So what can the regulators do?
Well, what we're going to do, we're going to make them do their jobs. We're going to force them to do their jobs, and we're going to force the banks to make loans in our community.
None of what you've just seen surprises Robert Petrie at all. He's been discouraged by banks his entire life, and just this January, he sued one. Petrie claimed because he's black, a loan officer quoted him outrageous terms to make him go away.
See, a lot of the things that's happening that's negative in the black community has been by design. And there are forces that have designed these problems that we face, and that's racism.
I think the time has come to bring to bear the power of the nonviolent direct action movement on the basic economic conditions that we face all over the country.
Economic justice is not about charity. It's about opportunity to borrow money, pay it back, and participate in the larger economy. But on the road to opportunity, unlike any other highway in Dallas County, only I-30 seems to get in the way. I'm David Schechter reporting.
So I hope you were able to see some of the historical context for why some of our neighborhoods in Dallas are the way that they are. There's so much economic history that has gotten us to the point at which we are today. And we still have banks today participating in this practice by not offering loans to communities that are historically low income and or populated by folks of color. And as this man pointed out, the inability to get a loan, to get your own house, to pay it off, to own property affects entire communities and entire families. For instance, if your grandparents or great-grandparents lived in one of the areas that is not redlined back in the 30s, then they probably were able to buy a house much more easily. That house over the years gained value, and then whenever they either resold it or when they resell it, they will make lots of money that they will then probably pass down to their next of kin whenever they pass away. And if your grandparents or great-grandparents lived in one of these redlined areas where they were not able to get a loan to buy their house, then they did not own their property and they do not have any wealth to pass on to establish their family further. So anytime you think about a neighborhood as being good or bad or nice or not nice or ghetto or not, just understand that there are years of history that go behind how those communities were formed and how even practices today can keep those areas poor and keep those areas from accumulating wealth as a community. I hope you learned a lot from this. There is a discussion for you and your class to have on the next slide about this. Be good to yourself and others, and I'll see you real soon.